And over those years, I've gone back to beautiful sites and been confronted with this. And it made me wonder what I was doing to help save the forest. And I began to wonder if in 50 years, are we going to have any forest left in Madagascar? And without forest, what does that mean for all the people I've worked with, all the people I've gotten to know and care about? Population has doubled since the time I started working in Madagascar. What does that mean for the future? Now, that's a problem that the world has to come to terms with. It's not just for Madagascar, but we have extended ourselves well beyond our normal means for using landscapes. So I began to think, I need a change as an entomologist. There's a role I can play, and it has to happen quick. And I began to think about the people and the landscapes, and I realized I have to stop working just in those pristine little dots and begin to work with the people that live around those forests. And it comes down to how are they going to feed their kids if they can't access the forest? If they can't cut down the trees to grow new crops, if they can't hunt for bushmeat and kill the lemurs, how are they going to feed their kids? They're running out of options. There's already migration where people are moving and looking for new possibilities, and there are none. That meant coming up with a new solution, and I call that the breakfast before conservation. Now, as an entomologist, at first I thought I had no role to play in this, but then I just started looking around. I was kind of blind to this, but do you see it? Those are insects there. In Madagascar, they eat edible insects. Now, insects, you may have heard about this now, that more and more people are turning to insects for lots of reasons. In fact, it just makes sense. Insects, unlike warm-blooded animals like a cow or a pig, you don't have to waste energy on heating a body. You don't have to give it extra water so it can sweat. Looking at it in terms of gains for insects, compare it to cattle, where it takes like 2,000 gallons of water to get a pound of protein, compared to only like 50 gallons for a cricket protein. Also in terms of space and impact on CO2. It takes 6 times the feed to get a pound from a cow compared to a cricket, for example. So that simple conversion rate, even if you're feeding it the same thing, you'll get 6 times the protein if you're feeding it to an insect compared to cattle. In fact, studies have shown that you can absorb more micronutrients from eating insects than a slab of steak. So you have efficient conversion rates, you have more micronutrients, and more studies are now showing that it improves our microbiome if you eat insects. So it just makes sense. So I wanted to see if there was potential of building on that tradition in Madagascar and finding maybe potential native species in which we could actually farm. So to begin that, going through the history of the last 400 years and reading about what people ate before and digging up recipes and documenting it. And there's some really interesting discoveries there. In fact, the first insect mentioned in 1658 was this cicada called a flathead. In fact, they didn't even know it was a cicada, like they called it a butterfly, and then they called it an ant. But actually, this insect, the red ones there that look like flowers, they tap into phloem and actually exude a bunch of sugar because they have to look for micronutrients in the phloem inside the plant. So they create these fist-sized piles of sugar that the locals would gather up and eat. So would the lemurs too. But this was highly sought after. In fact, during the colonial period, a French botanist actually tried to farm these and create this mana, he called, in Madagascar using this incredible flathead. But the real star of this group of insects is what's called the Sacundry, the one with the strange kind of harness on its head there. Now these are amazing, and this was the other most talked about insect in this group in the literature because everybody loved to eat it. It tastes like bacon. The locals call it Sacundry, but in English, you can call it the bacon bug. Like bacon, you can just put it in a pot and fry it up in its own grease, and it's delicious. Going back and reading through the history, we also discovered that one group of insects was the most easily absorbed in other types of cuisines, and that was the pupa from silk moth. French chefs in Madagascar would actually serve it in the French residence in 1884, and they would describe it as some butterfly brains, because it tasted like veal brains. And even the last queen of Madagascar used to have special helpers that would scour the countryside for these types of edible insects, including the silk moth pupa and also locust. And to my surprise, I didn't even see this before, just next to our center in the capital of Madagascar, they sell pupa of silk moths. And do note that they're selling it next to shrimp, which is actually also a crustacean. So it's actually phylogenetically the correct place to sell it in the market. And it's actually sold at the same price as shrimp. In other words, historically, they valued edible insects. They're sold at a very high price, and there's a long tradition of it.